Cook County Commissioner Richard Boykin, a Democrat, wants the UN to possibly send in a peacekeeping force into Chicago to try to put a lid on violence. That would be great. The UN doesn't have that great a record on keeping the peace, and even if they did, you could be trading gun violence with child rape. UN peacekeepers have a long history of raping children that even the UN itself admits to. And doesn't he realize that UN peacekeepers would carry guns? That could even make them an occupying force within the United States, which would go over like a lead balloon. The United Nations is raping children. The facilitation of these child rapes is in part funded by the UK taxpayer. You think this is fake news? Well, let's go right to the top and check the facts. Earlier this month, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, in releasing the 2016 UN Annual Review, said that there were 145 cases of sexual exploitation and abuse involving troops and civilians across all UN peace missions in 2016 alone. The United Nations Secretary-General is talking about his own organization. These 145 cases involved 311 victims, and even the UN recognizes that this is the tip of the iceberg. Many of the victims, by the UN's own admission, are children. From the Conservative Tribune. Instead of looking to President Donald Trump for assistance with Chicago's never-ending gun violence, Cook County Commissioner Richard Boykin, a Democrat, has reportedly expressed interest in teaming up with the United Nations. I'm hoping to appeal to the UN to actually come to Chicago and meet with victims of violence, and maybe even possibly help out in terms of peacekeeping efforts, because I think it's so critical for us to make sure that these neighborhoods are safe, he said Thursday, according to local station WBBM. He reportedly made the remarks from Chicago's O'Hare International Airport en route to New York to meet with Oscar Fernandez Duranco of Argentina, the UN Assistant Secretary-General for Peacekeeping Support. President Trump has already sent 20 agents from the ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms and explosives, to Chicago to aid them, and even offered them National Guard troops, which Mayor Rahm Emanuel rejected, that could have helped by policing high-crime areas. Boykin does admit that most of the gun violence in Chicago is perpetrated by blacks against blacks. Emanuel has declared Chicago a Trump-free zone. Of course, Chicago is almost an entirely gun-free zone, so his claim lacks credibility. Your Newswire reported. The Pentagon have approved a scheme allowing UN peacekeeping troops to police U.S. citizens. The federal government have announced their support for a set of principles that allow UN troops to police and use force in order to protect citizens in the event of an armed conflict. Long-sleeve printed tactical Christmas. Don't just be the conversation starter during the holidays. Be the conversation, MilitaryTimes.com reports. The United States has announced its support for a set of principles that give a green light for UN peacekeeping troops and police to use force to protect civilians in armed conflicts. U.S. Ambassador Samantha Power told a high-level UN meeting Wednesday focusing on the responsibility to protect civilians that the United States was proud and humbled to join 28 other countries that have pledged to abide by the 18 pledges. UN peacekeepers from these 29 countries are now required to act in cases where civilians are in danger. The Kigali Principles are designed to make sure that civilians are not abandoned by the international community again, she said, recalling how UN peacekeepers left Rwanda before the 1994 genocide and Srebrenica before the 1995 massacre.